The mahogany desk was so pristine I could see my warped reflection in its gloss surface, pressed blouse, severe bun, lips pressed into a line thin enough to disappear. My fountain pen scratched across the contract amendment, the sound rhythmic and safe, the only noise I was permitted to make in Carlo Longo's inner sanctum. I focused on that sound, anything to ignore the weight of his presence 6 feet behind me, the heat of his gaze that I pretended not to feel. I'd been Carlo's executive secretary for 3 years now, always at this desk, always invisible. Today, my usual gray skirt was at the dry cleaners, wine stain from yesterday's business lunch that had ended with 2 bodies in the harbor. So I'd pulled out my backup pencil skirt, black and professional. What I'd forgotten was that my laundry basket had been empty this morning. The office stretched before me like a chessboard I'd learned to navigate without being captured. All leather-bound law books and that grandfather clock whose ticking marked time like a heart monitor. The air was thick with Cuban tobacco and the metallic tang of danger that clung to every surface Carlo touched. My stockings whispered against each other as I shifted, a sound so quiet it shouldn't have mattered. Shouldn't have been heard over the city noise filtering through bulletproof windows. Before continuing the story, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories to you. I kept my breathing steady, counting tasks. For more contracts to annotate. Then I could retreat to my external desk, file the documents, and disappear into my studio apartment where Mafia bosses didn't notice the help. For contracts. I could manage that. Susan. The voice stopped my pen mid-stroke. My stomach twisted. That familiar baritone with its barely contained violence, the way he said my name like a verdict, turning my carefully maintained invisibility to ash. I didn't look up. I never looked up unless instructed. But my hand trembled just slightly, and the pen scratched a jagged line across the page, the first imperfect mark I'd made in 3 years. Bring me the Castellano file. Now. Professional. Routine. I could do this. I stood, smoothing my skirt with hands that had forgotten how to stay steady, and turned toward the filing cabinet behind his desk. 3 steps. That's all it would take. 3 steps through his orbit and back to safety. I made it too. The grandfather clock chose that moment to chime. My heel caught on the Persian rug's edge. And the glass of scotch I'd placed on his desk an hour ago, positioned with the precision of a bomb defusal, tipped as my hip grazed the mahogany corner. Time crystallized. The amber liquid arced through cigar smoke. Carlo's hand shot out, catching my elbow with a grip that could snap bone. The glass shattered against Italian marble. And in the chaos of falling and catching and breaking, my conservative skirt rode up. Just 3 inches. Just enough. The crimson silk of the panties, the ones I'd shoved in a drawer and forgotten, a gift from Marco the wine distributor who thought flowers and lingerie would make me notice him, caught the light from Carlo's desk lamp like a flare in the dark. The air left the room. Carlo's hand on my elbow became iron. His other hand braced against the desk, caging me between mahogany and muscle. I watched his jaw clench, watched the careful mask he wore crack down the middle as his eyes fixed on that sliver of red silk peeking above my conservative wool blend. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, each word scraped from somewhere deep and dangerous. "Who got you those, Susan?" And I realized, with the clarity of a woman staring down a loaded gun, that I had made the catastrophic mistake of being seen. I learned to be invisible on my second day working for Carlo Longo. The first day had been all paperwork and NDAs thick enough to stop bullets, which, given my new employer's line of work, wasn't entirely metaphorical. I'd signed my name 27 times, been fingerprinted twice, and received a security badge that granted me access to the 42nd floor of the Longo Holdings building. The executive floor. The floor where legitimate business deals were brokered in conference rooms with Italian marble floors, while the real negotiations happened behind mahogany doors that locked from the inside. Day 2, I watched a man die. Not literally. Technically, Vincent Calabrese walked out of Carlo's office on his own 2 feet, pale but intact. But I'd seen the look in his eyes when he passed my desk, the glazed recognition of a man who'd just been handed his own death warrant wrapped in a handshake and a smile. 2 weeks later, his car went off a bridge upstate. Break failure, the news reported. Carlo sent flowers to the funeral. I made myself smaller after that. It wasn't difficult. I'd spent most of my life perfecting the art of being overlooked. Growing up in foster care taught me that the quiet ones didn't get moved around as much. The invisible ones sometimes got to stay. So I became a ghost in sensible heels, a woman whose presence registered just enough to be useful, but never enough to be memorable. Carlo Longo didn't hire me for my personality. He hired me because my references were impeccable, my typing speed was 90 words per minute, and I had a degree in business administration from a state school that proved I was smart enough to be competent, but not ambitious enough to be dangerous. I was supposed to be the human equivalent of beige wallpaper, present, functional, and utterly forgettable. For 3 years, I played that role perfectly. I arrived at 7:45 every morning, 15 minutes before Carlo, and left at 6 o'clock every evening, 15 minutes after him. I wore gray skirts and white blouses and nude stockings. I kept my dark hair in a bun so tight it gave me headaches. I never wore perfume, never wore jewelry beyond simple pearl studs, never wore anything that might draw the eye or spark a memory. I learned the hierarchy quickly. Carlo sat at the top, untouchable and absolute. Below him were the captains, Marcus Vitelli, who handled the docks, Franco Romano, who ran the gambling operations, and Leo Castellano, who managed what they politely called private security and what everyone else called enforcement. Below them were the soldiers, and below them were people like me, the support staff who kept the legitimate businesses running smoothly enough to launder the illegitimate ones. I learned to read the room in the 5 seconds it took me to enter with coffee. Tense shoulders meant a deal had gone bad. Laughter meant someone else's deal had gone bad. Silence meant Carlo was thinking, and when Carlo Longo was thinking, smart people made themselves scarce. I learned which files could be left on the desk and which needed to be locked in the safe behind the Modigliani painting. I learned that lunch meeting meant someone was about to lose a finger and dinner reservation meant they might lose more. I learned to keep 2 sets of books, one for the IRS, one for Carlo, and to never, ever mix them up. I learned to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. Coffee at 8 o'clock, black with 1 sugar. Fresh contracts laid out by 9 o'clock. Lunch brought in at 1 o'clock if he was meeting with legitimate investors, nothing at all if the guests arrived through the private elevator. Scotch poured at 5 o'clock, always in the crystal tumbler with the Longo family crest etched into the base. I became an extension of the office itself, as necessary and unnoticed as the grandfather clock in the corner. But invisible didn't mean blind. I saw everything. The way Marcus Vitelli's hand shook slightly when he reported the quarterly numbers, knowing they were short. The way Franco Romano's wife called the office at 2 o'clock every Thursday, and the way Franco never took those calls. The way Leo Castellano cleaned his fingernails with a pocket knife after certain meetings, and the way the blade was never quite clean afterward. And I saw Carlo. Not the Carlo Longo that the business world saw, the shark in an Italian suit who'd turned his father's struggling construction company into a multi-million-dollar empire. Not the Carlo that his enemies feared, the ice-cold Don who'd consolidated power in the city's underworld before his 35th birthday by being smarter, faster, and exponentially more ruthless than anyone who'd challenged him. I saw the man who rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking. The man who kept a photo of his mother in his desk drawer and touched it before every major decision. The man who read philosophy in Italian when the stress of running an empire, legal and otherwise, made his shoulders rigid as steel. I saw him watch me sometimes, too. Quick glances that lasted a fraction too long. The way his jaw tightened when Marco the wine distributor made his monthly delivery and spent 5 extra minutes at my desk, talking about everything and nothing. The way his office door would close just slightly harder on the days I wore my gray skirt instead of the black one. But I pretended not to notice. Noticing meant acknowledging. Acknowledging meant becoming visible. And visible women in Carlo Longo's world had a habit of becoming collateral damage. So I stayed small. Stayed quiet. Stayed safe. For 3 years, that strategy worked flawlessly. Until the morning my regular skirt was at the dry cleaners, my laundry basket was empty, and the only clean underwear I had left was crimson silk wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of my drawer, a gift I'd never asked for, from a man I'd never wanted. Until the moment I stopped being invisible. The alarm didn't go off. That was the first domino in a chain reaction that would destroy 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility. My phone had died sometime in the night, which meant I woke up at 7:23 instead of 6:30, which meant I had exactly 22 minutes to shower, dress, and somehow make it to the office before Carlo arrived at 8 o'clock. I moved through my studio apartment like a hurricane. Shower in 4 minutes, no time to wash my hair, just pull it back wet. Makeup in 3, concealer under the eyes, neutral lipstick, nothing more. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I yanked open my closet, reaching for the gray skirt that had become my uniform. The hanger was empty. My stomach dropped as the memory surfaced. Yesterday's business lunch with the Calabrese family representatives. The youngest son, barely 20 and trying too hard to prove himself, had knocked over his wine glass in a show of nervous bravado. The red had splashed across the table and onto my lap, soaking through to my skin. I'd kept my face perfectly neutral, dabbed at the stain with my napkin, and continued taking notes while Carlo negotiated terms for a construction contract that we both knew was a front for something else entirely. The skirt had gone straight into a bag for the dry cleaners. I'd meant to pick it up yesterday evening. I hadn't. I grabbed the black pencil skirt instead, my backup, the one I wore perhaps once a month when the gray one needed cleaning. It would be fine. Professional. Appropriate. I stepped into it, zipped it up, and reached for my dresser drawer where I kept my stockings and underwear organized by color and style. The drawer was a wasteland of empty. Laundry day was Sunday. Today was Tuesday. I'd been meaning to do a midweek load, but there'd been that emergency meeting on Monday night about the shipment delay, and I'd gotten home at 11 o'clock, and I'd fallen into bed fully clothed and forgotten about everything else. I stared at the drawer like it might spontaneously generate clothing through sheer force of will. 2 pairs of stockings, both with runs. 1 pair of cotton briefs that had seen better days, probably 5 years ago. And at the very back, wrapped in pink tissue paper that had faded to salmon, the gift. Marco had presented it to me 6 weeks ago, along with a bouquet of roses that must have cost him a week's salary. He'd stammered something about how I deserved beautiful things, how he'd noticed I only ever wore practical clothes, how he wanted to give me something special. I'd accepted it with the same polite smile I gave to everyone, thanked him, and shoved it in the drawer to be forgotten. The crimson silk mocked me now. I had 15 minutes. The nearest drugstore was a 10-minute walk. I couldn't show up late. Carlo Longo didn't tolerate lateness, not even from the invisible help. Especially not from the invisible help. We were supposed to be so reliable we practically ran on autopilot. I pulled the tissue paper apart with fingers that wanted to shake. The fabric spilled into my hands like water, impossibly soft and utterly inappropriate. The panties were French cut, high on the hip, with delicate lace trim along the edges. The kind of thing that belonged in a boudoir, not under a conservative pencil skirt in a Mafia boss's office. 14 minutes. I made a decision I would regret for the rest of my life. The silk slid against my skin like a whisper, foreign and unsettling. I'd been wearing the same style of cotton briefs for years, high-waisted, full coverage, the kind that didn't show lines and didn't draw attention. These were the opposite of everything I'd trained myself to be. The lace sat against my hip bones, delicate and present, a constant reminder that I was wearing something I shouldn't be. I pulled on the black skirt over them, zipped it up, and checked my reflection in the full-length mirror by the door. Professional. Appropriate. The skirt hit just below my knee, the hem perfectly straight. My white blouse was crisp and buttoned to the collar. Pearl earrings. Nude heels. Hair pulled back in the usual severe bun. Nothing showed. Nothing gave me away. But I could feel it. The silk moved differently than cotton. It shifted with every step, a secret sliding against my skin that made me hyper-aware of my body in a way I'd spent 3 years trying to suppress. The lace at the edges created the faintest friction, not quite uncomfortable but impossible to ignore. It was like wearing a live wire beneath my armor, hidden but electric. I grabbed my bag, my coffee in its travel mug, and rushed out the door. The subway was packed, and I stood pressed between a man reading the Financial Times and a woman scrolling through her phone, acutely conscious of the crimson silk beneath my rigid professional exterior. Every movement felt amplified. Every shift of my weight reminded me that I was wearing something that didn't belong in my carefully controlled world. By the time I emerged at street level, I'd convinced myself it would be fine. No one would know. How could they? I looked exactly the same as I did every other day. Same skirt, same blouse, same shoes. The only difference was hidden beneath layers of wool and cotton, a secret I'd keep until I got home tonight and could return to my normal, invisible self. I walked into the Longo Holdings building at 7:47. 13 minutes to spare. I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, nodded to the security guard, and settled at my desk outside Carlo's office. I pulled out the contracts that needed annotation, uncapped my fountain pen, smoothed my skirt beneath me as I sat. The silk whispered against the leather chair. I ignored it. I was good at ignoring things. 3 years of practice. I didn't know that in less than 12 hours, Carlo Longo would have his hand wrapped around my elbow, his eyes locked on that sliver of crimson, and I would learn exactly how catastrophic it was to stop being invisible. The day passed in its usual rhythm until Marcus Vitelli arrived at 9 o'clock with tension written across his shoulders. I knew immediately that the shipment had gone wrong. Marcus only wore that particular shade of pale when he was about to deliver bad news to Carlo, and Carlo only accepted bad news in person when it was bad enough to require immediate damage control. I'd seen this dance before. Usually it ended with someone losing something, money, territory, or, if they were particularly unlucky, their ability to walk without a limp. I brought in the coffee at 9:05, set the tray on Carlo's desk without making eye contact, and retreated to my station. Through the closed door, I could hear the low rumble of voices. Carlo's remained steady. Marcus's climbed higher with each exchange. By 10 o'clock, Franco Romano had arrived. By noon, Leo Castellano joined them. When all 3 captains were in the office simultaneously, it meant the problem was big enough to threaten the foundation. I ordered lunch from the Italian place on 5th Avenue, the one that didn't ask questions and delivered in unmarked containers. Chicken piccata for Carlo. Pasta for the others. I left it on the credenza outside the door and knocked twice. No one came out to get it. The food sat there until it went cold, and I eventually threw it away. At 6 o'clock, my usual departure time, I stood to leave. The office door opened, and Carlo's voice cut through the silence. "Susan. Stay." 2 words. Not a request. I sat back down, smoothed my skirt, and waited. The captains filed out one by one, each of them looking like they'd aged a decade in 9 hours. Leo nodded at me as he passed, his version of acknowledgement. Marcus didn't even look up. Franco muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer. When they were gone, Carlo appeared in the doorway. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. I'd never seen him with his sleeves rolled up before. There was a tattoo on his left forearm, script in Italian that I couldn't quite read from my desk. "I need the shipping manifests from the Rotterdam account. All of them from the past 6 months." I nodded and moved to the filing cabinet in his office, the one that required both a key and a fingerprint scan. The Rotterdam account was one of the legitimate ones, luxury goods imported from Europe, sold through high-end boutiques in the city. On paper, it was completely above board. In reality, every 3rd container held something that would never appear on a customs form. I pulled the files and brought them to his desk. He'd poured himself a scotch, his 3rd of the day, by my count. The crystal tumbler sat on the edge of the mahogany, catching the light from the desk lamp. "Sit. I need you to cross-reference the dates." I sat in the chair across from him, the one usually reserved for people about to receive very good news or very bad news. He slid half the files toward me, and I began comparing shipment dates against payment records, looking for discrepancies. The work was meticulous and tedious, the kind of thing that required complete focus. It was nearly 11 o'clock when I found the problem. 3 shipments that had been logged as received but never processed for payment. Someone in the chain had either stolen the merchandise or rerouted it before it reached the warehouse. Either way, it was a loss of nearly $2 million. I opened my mouth to tell Carlo, but he was already on his phone, his voice low and lethal as he spoke rapid Italian to someone on the other end. I caught enough words to understand. Find them, fix this, make an example. When he ended the call, he scrubbed a hand over his face and reached for his scotch. His elbow caught the edge of the glass. Everything happened in slow motion. The tumbler tipped. The amber liquid arced through the air. I lunged forward instinctively, trying to catch it before it hit the files, before $2 million in evidence became a scotch-stained mess. My hand missed. The glass shattered against the floor. The liquor splashed across my skirt, soaking through the black wool in an instant. Carlo was on his feet immediately, his hand gripping my elbow, steadying me as I stumbled back from the broken glass. Don't move. He grabbed the towel he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he used to clean his guns, and knelt at my feet. Actually knelt, this man who made grown criminals weep, crouching on the floor to pick up shards of crystal while I stood frozen above him. I'm sorry, I managed. You should have nothing. My fault. His voice was clipped, focused on the task. He gathered the larger pieces, then looked up at me. Your skirt. The scotch had soaked through to my skin, cold and uncomfortable. The wool clung to my thighs. It's fine. There's glass. You need to check for glass. He stood, his height suddenly overwhelming in the small space between desk and chair. Take it off. My heart stopped. What? The skirt. There might be splinters embedded. I've seen it happen before. Someone sits down, drives crystal into their leg, ends up needing stitches. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in 3 years, he was really looking at me. Not through me. At me. I'll turn around. He did, facing the window that overlooked the city lights. I stood there, paralyzed, my brain screaming at me to refuse, to leave, to do anything except what I was about to do. But Carlo Longo had given me a direct order. My hands shook as I reached for the zipper. The scotch-soaked wool peeled away from my skin. I stepped out of the skirt, holding it bunched in my hands, standing in Carlo's office at 11 o'clock at night in my blouse and the crimson silk panties that caught the lamplight like a beacon. I heard the exact moment he turned around. Heard the sharp intake of breath. Heard the grandfather clock tick once, twice, 3 times in the silence that followed. When he spoke, his voice was barely human. Who got you those, Susan? What would you do if your carefully built armor suddenly shattered? Drop your thoughts below or subscribe for the next part of the story. The distance between Carlo and me evaporated in a heartbeat. One moment he was across the room by the window, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline. The next he was in front of me, close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath and the expensive cologne that clung to his shirt. His eyes weren't on my face. They were locked on the crimson silk riding low on my hips, on the delicate lace that had no business existing in his world of blood and contracts and very carefully maintained control. I asked you a question. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that preceded violence. Who got you those? My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My brain had short-circuited somewhere between removing my skirt and watching Carlo Longo's composure crack, like the crystal tumbler on the floor. I clutched the wet wool against my chest like a shield, acutely aware that it protected nothing. He took a step closer. Then another. I backed up until my spine hit the edge of his desk, trapped between mahogany and muscle and 3 years of unspoken tension that had just detonated in the space of a breath. Susan. My name in his mouth sounded like a warning and a prayer. Answer me. Marco, I whispered. The wine distributor. It was a gift. I didn't ask for it. I never even opened it until this morning when I didn't have anything else clean and I was late and I thought, you thought you'd wear another man's gift under your skirt and come to my office. His hand came up and I flinched before I could stop myself. But he didn't touch me. His fingers went to the door behind me and I heard the lock click into place with a finality that made my stomach drop. You thought I wouldn't notice. You weren't supposed to see it. The words came out too fast, too honest. No one was supposed to see it. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. He repeated it like he was tasting the words, testing them for truth. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. Marco gives you silk lingerie, and it doesn't mean anything. I don't want Marco. I've never wanted, then why are you wearing his gift? The question came out like gravel, like broken glass. Why are you standing in my office at 11 o'clock at night with red silk on your skin that I didn't put there? The possessiveness in those words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time without the professional distance I'd maintained for 3 years. This wasn't my boss. This was a man who looked at me like I was his, and someone had dared to touch what belonged to him. Carlo. His name felt foreign on my tongue. I never used his first name. It was always Mr. Longo, always formal, always safe. It's just underwear. Just underwear, he echoed, and suddenly his hand was on the desk beside my hip, caging me in. Do you know what I do to men who touch what's mine? I'm not yours. But my voice shook when I said it. His laugh was dark, humorless. No? Then why do you think you're still alive, Susan? Why do you think you've lasted 3 years in this office when most secretaries don't make it past 6 months? You think it's your typing speed? He leaned in closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off him, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes that I'd never been close enough to notice before. You think I haven't noticed every man who looks at you too long? Every delivery driver who lingers at your desk? Marco and his flowers and his wine and his pathetic attempts to impress you. You never said anything. My hands were shaking. The wet skirt dropped from my fingers, forgotten. I didn't need to say anything. They knew. His other hand came up to the desk on my other side, and now I was completely trapped, surrounded by him. One look was all it took. One look, and they understood that you were off limits. That touching you, talking to you, even thinking about you wrong would cost them everything. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Because you're mine, Susan. You've been mine since the day you walked into this office with your resume and your sensible shoes, and that smile you use like a weapon to keep everyone at arm's length. His hand moved from the desk to my face, his thumb tracing my jaw with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to feel this way about my secretary? About the one person in my life who's supposed to be safe, neutral, invisible? I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. 3 years of being invisible, and he'd seen me the entire time. I didn't know I managed. You didn't want to know. It was easier that way, wasn't it? Easier to pretend I was just the boss. Just another dangerous man to avoid. His thumb moved to my bottom lip, and I felt myself stop breathing entirely. But you can't pretend anymore, can you? Not now. Not when you're standing here wearing another man's gift, and I want to burn it off your body and replace it with something that makes it clear exactly who you belong to. Carlo, this is insane? Inappropriate? Dangerous. His smile was sharp enough to cut. Welcome to my world, Susan. You've been living in it for 3 years. The only difference is now you can't hide from it anymore. What do you want from me? My voice cracked on the question. His eyes met mine, and I saw the truth there before he spoke it. Saw the hunger, the possessiveness, the barely controlled violence of a man who'd been holding himself back for far too long. Everything, he said simply. I want everything. I arrived at work the next morning to find a box on my desk. Black lacquered wood, about the size of a shoebox, with a small silver clasp. No note. No card. Just the box, sitting in the exact center of my workspace like a declaration of war. I knew what it was before I opened it. Knew it the same way I'd known that Vincent Calabrese was a dead man walking when he left Carlo's office 3 years ago. Some things announce themselves without words. Inside, nestled in tissue paper the color of champagne, were 6 pairs of panties. Silk. Lace. Each one more expensive than anything I'd ever owned. Black, ivory, champagne, emerald, sapphire, and at the very bottom, crimson. But this crimson was different from Marco's gift. This was darker, richer, the color of wine or blood, with lace so delicate it looked like it might dissolve at a touch. Beneath the lingerie was a note in Carlo's precise handwriting, dispose of the others. These are the only ones you're permitted to wear. My hands shook as I closed the box. Permitted. Not asked. Not suggested. Permitted. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Carlo's voice, smooth as expensive whiskey, my office. Now. I left the box where it was and walked into his domain on legs that didn't feel entirely steady. He sat behind his desk, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit, reading through a contract like last night hadn't happened. Like he hadn't caged me against his desk and told me I belonged to him. Close the door. I did. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. Did you receive my gift? He didn't look up from the contract. Yes. And? And what? Now he looked up, and the heat in his eyes made my breath catch. And you'll dispose of anything that didn't come from me. Today. Carlo, this is what, Susan? He set down his pen with deliberate care. Inappropriate? You wore another man's gift beneath your clothes in my presence. I'm correcting that situation. Unless you'd prefer I correct it personally. I can come to your apartment tonight, go through your drawers myself, remove anything I find offensive. The image of Carlo Longo in my studio apartment, touching my things, invaded my space, made something hot and uncomfortable twist in my stomach. That won't be necessary. Good. Because I have a list of other things that are going to change. He pulled out a piece of paper, another note in that same precise handwriting. You'll no longer take the subway. A car will pick you up at 7:30 every morning and bring you home every evening. The driver's name is Vincent. He's one of mine. I don't need you do. This city isn't safe for you anymore. His tone left no room for argument. As of last night, you became visible. That means you became a target. My enemies will look for weaknesses, and Susan, you are the only weakness I have. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. Second, he continued, you will not speak to Marco again. If he makes a delivery, someone else receives it. If he asks about you, you're unavailable. If he persists, I'll handle it personally, and Susan, you don't want me to handle it personally. I thought about Marco's nervous smile, his earnest attempts at conversation. He's harmless. He wants you. That makes him dangerous. Carlo's jaw tightened. Third, your apartment. You live alone in a building with no security, no doorman, no camera system. That ends this weekend. I'm moving you. Excuse me. There's a building on the Upper East Side. My building. Top floor. Security on every entrance, cameras in every hallway, guards who answer to me. You'll move in Saturday. You can't just, I can. He stood, rounding the desk with the predatory grace I'd watched him use on men who didn't walk away intact. I own the building. I own this company. And as of last night, Susan, I own you. You don't own me. But the words came out weaker than I wanted them to. He stopped inches away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. No? Then walk out that door. Go back to your apartment. Wear whatever you want. Talk to whoever you want. Live your invisible little life. His hand came up to cut my jaw, his thumb brushing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. But we both know you won't. Because you felt it last night, the same way I've felt it for 3 years. The pull. The inevitability. You're mine, and fighting it will only make both of us miserable. This is obsession, I whispered. Yes. No shame in the admission. But obsession keeps you alive. Obsession means every man in this city knows what happens if they touch you. Obsession means you sleep in a secure building where no one can reach you without going through me first. His other hand settled on my hip, possessive and warm. Obsession means you're the safest woman in New York, even if it means you're also the most trapped. I should have run. Should have quit, packed my bags, disappeared into another city where mafia bosses didn't know my name. But his thumb was tracing patterns on my skin, and my body was leaning into him like it had been waiting 3 years for permission. What if I say no? I asked, even though we both knew I wouldn't. His smile was dark and certain. Then I'll convince you. I've got all the time in the world, Susan, and I've never lost a negotiation yet. The box was still on my desk when I returned. I took it home that night in the car Carlo had sent, a black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver who called me ma'am and didn't ask questions. I disposed of the others, just like he'd demanded. And I hated how right the new ones felt against my skin. Is protection the same as possession? Drop your answer below and subscribe. The black Mercedes became my new normal. Vincent picked me up at 7:30 every morning, always punctual, always silent unless I initiated conversation. He was built like a tank and wore his jacket loose to accommodate the gun I pretended not to notice at his hip. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the incident with the crimson silk, I noticed the second car. It was subtle at first. A dark sedan that appeared in my rearview mirror, or rather, in the view from the back seat where I now spent my mornings reviewing files on my tablet. The car stayed 3 vehicles back, maintaining a careful distance that would have been invisible to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years learning to read the subtle signs of danger. "Vincent," I said quietly, the gray Audi. "How long has it been following us?" His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Since we left your building, Miss Pollard." The use of my full name instead of ma'am told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't routine surveillance. This was something that concerned him. "Are they Carlo's people?" "No, ma'am." My stomach dropped. "Then whose?" "Can't say for certain yet. But Mr. Longo will want to know about this immediately." He was already reaching for his phone, one hand steady on the wheel as he navigated morning traffic. I watched the Audi maintain its position, professional and patient. Whoever was driving knew what they were doing. This wasn't some amateur operation. Vincent spoke in rapid Italian, his tone clipped and urgent. When he ended the call, he met my eyes in the mirror. "Mr. Longo wants you to stay in the office today. All day, don't leave for lunch. Don't leave for anything. Vincent, I have a dry cleaning pickup at, I'll handle it." His tone left no room for argument. "With respect, Miss Pollard, you need to understand something. You're not invisible anymore. And that means people are watching." The Audi followed us all the way to the Longo Holdings building. It didn't park. Didn't stop. Just drove past as Vincent pulled into the underground garage, but I saw the driver's face for a split second as they passed. Male, late 30s, expensive sunglasses. The kind of man who blended into high-end Manhattan like he was born to it. The kind of man who worked for someone with resources. Carlo was waiting in his office when I arrived. He didn't say good morning. Didn't acknowledge my presence beyond a curt nod toward the chair across from his desk. Leo Castellano stood by the window, his usual position during strategy sessions. "Tell me what you saw," Carlo said. I described the Audi, the driver, the professional distance they'd maintained. Carlo listened without interrupting, his expression carved from stone. When I finished, Leo spoke. "Matches the description of one of Dante Moretti's surveillance teams. He's been expanding his operations into the waterfront territories." Moretti. I knew the name. Everyone in Carlo's world knew the Moretti family. They controlled the gambling operations on the east side, had their fingers in union contracts and city construction permits. They were Carlo's rivals in the most dangerous sense, ambitious enough to challenge him, smart enough to be a real threat. "Why would Moretti have someone follow me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Carlo's eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his gaze: fear. Not for himself. For me. "Because he's noticed that I've changed my patterns," Carlo said quietly. "The car I send for you. The apartment I'm moving you into. The way I react when your name comes up in conversation." His hands were flat on the desk, knuckles white with tension. He's looking for leverage. "And Susan, in my world, leverage means kidnapping," Leo finished bluntly. "Or worse. If Moretti thinks you matter to the boss, you become the fastest way to bring Carlo to the negotiating table on his knees." The room tilted slightly. This was what Invisible had protected me from. This was why I'd spent 3 years being the human equivalent of office furniture. "What do we do?" My voice sounded remarkably steady considering my heart was trying to break through my ribcage. "You move into the new apartment tonight," Carlo said. "Not this weekend. Tonight. Leo will coordinate the transfer. You'll have security posted outside your door, and Vincent will be with you whenever you leave the building. Carlo, this is non-negotiable." He stood, rounding the desk with that predatory intensity that made every instinct I had scream danger. "You think I'm being controlling? You think this is about ownership? This is about keeping you alive, Susan. Because if Dante Moretti gets his hands on you, he'll use you to destroy everything I've built. And he'll enjoy every second of it." I thought about the stories I'd overheard over 3 years. The things the Moretti family did to send messages. The warehouse fire that wasn't an accident. The city councilman who'd voted the wrong way and ended up in the river. I never asked for this, I whispered. No. Carlo's hand cupped my face, tilting it up to meet his eyes. You asked to be invisible. But I saw you anyway. And that's my sin, not yours. But you're living with the consequences now, and so am I. Leo cleared his throat. Boss, we should move her within the hour. The longer she stays visible, the more intel Moretti gathers. Carlo nodded, but didn't take his eyes off me. Go to your desk. Act normal. When I give the signal, you'll leave with Leo through the executive elevator. Don't pack anything from your apartment. We'll send someone to get your belongings later. Don't tell anyone where you're going. As of this moment, Susan, you've disappeared again. Except I haven't, I said, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd lost. I'll never really disappear again, will I? His silence was answer enough. The Audi was parked across the street when Leo escorted me out 3 hours later. I saw it through the tinted windows of the armored SUV he'd brought instead of Vincent's Mercedes. Saw the driver watching our vehicle with the patience of a predator who knew his prey couldn't run forever. I'd spent 3 years becoming invisible to stay safe. 1 week visible, and I'd become the most valuable target in the city. The apartment Carlo moved me into was 3 times the size of my studio and felt like a gilded cage. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. Marble countertops and a kitchen I didn't cook in. A bedroom with a bed so large I felt lost in it. And outside the door, 24 hours a day, a guard named Anthony who nodded politely whenever I emerged, but whose presence reminded me constantly that I was no longer free. I'd been living there for 5 days when James Morrison arrived at the office. He was a corporate lawyer from the firm that handled Longo Holdings' legitimate contracts. The kind of clean-cut professional who'd never touched anything illegal in his life and probably believed Carlo was just a successful businessman with a talent for construction and real estate. He came to discuss the merger documents for a hotel acquisition, and he made the catastrophic mistake of being friendly. Susan, right? He smiled as he waited in the reception area outside Carlo's office. I don't think we've officially met. I'm James. I shook his hand because it would have been rude not to. Professional. Normal. The kind of interaction I'd had 1,000 times before Carlo decided I belonged to him. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Longo is running about 10 minutes behind. Can I get you coffee? Please. And call me James. He leaned against my desk, casual and relaxed. You know, I've been coming here for 2 years, and I don't think you've ever said more than 5 words to me. Carlo keeps you busy, huh? The job is demanding. I kept my tone neutral, professional, as I poured his coffee. I bet. Hey, I've been meaning to ask, there's a charity gala next month for the Children's Hospital. My firm bought a table, and I have an extra seat. Would you be interested in? The office door opened with enough force to make James jump. Carlo stood in the doorway, filling the frame with barely contained violence. His eyes locked on James's hand where it rested on the edge of my desk, then moved to James's face with an expression that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Morrison, you're early. Actually, I'm right on time. James checked his watch, oblivious to the danger radiating from every line of Carlo's body. I was just asking Susan about. Miss Pollard has work to do. My office. Now. James blinked at the dismissal, but gathered his briefcase and followed Carlo inside. I heard the door close, not slam. Carlo had too much control for that, but close with a finality that made my hands shake as I returned to my keyboard. The meeting lasted exactly 12 minutes. James emerged looking confused and slightly rattled, mumbled a goodbye in my direction without meeting my eyes, and left quickly enough that I knew Carlo had said something. Done something. Made it clear in whatever way Carlo Longo made things clear that speaking to me was a terminally bad idea. The intercom buzzed 30 seconds later. My office. Now. I'd known this was coming. Had felt it building from the moment Carlo saw James leaning against my desk. But knowing didn't make it easier as I walked into his domain and heard the lock click behind me. Carlo stood by the window, his back to me, hands shoved in his pockets in a posture that looked casual but radiated tension like a live wire. What did he want? His voice was too quiet, too controlled. To ask me to a charity gala. And what did you say? I didn't get a chance to say anything. You interrupted. He turned, and the look on his face made me take an involuntary step back. You were going to say yes. I was going to say no, actually. I don't go to charity galas. I don't date. He was touching your desk. Carlo moved toward me with predatory intent, leaning against it like he had a right to be in your space, smiling at you like you were available, like you weren't already spoken for. He doesn't know I'm spoken for because this entire situation is insane. The words burst out before I could stop them. He's a corporate lawyer who thinks you're a legitimate businessman. He was being friendly. That's what normal people do, Carlo. They're friendly. You're not normal people anymore, Susan. You're mine. And every man in this building needs to understand that looking at you wrong, speaking to you casually, asking you to galas like you're some available secretary they can charm. He was in front of me now, close enough that I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Will cost them everything. You can't threaten everyone who speaks to me. Watch me. His hands came up to frame my face, his touch gentle in direct contrast to the violence in his voice. You think this is about jealousy? You think I care about James Morrison and his pathetic attempt at asking you out? Then what is it about? It's about the fact that you are the only clean thing in my life. The confession tore out of him like it had been locked away too long. Do you understand that? Every person I talk to wants something from me. Every business deal is a chess move. Every conversation is a negotiation with violence lurking underneath. But his thumb traced my cheekbone, and I saw something raw and desperate in his eyes. You came to work every day for 3 years and asked for nothing. Expected nothing. Just did your job with your fountain pen and your perfect filing system and your invisible armor that made you safe from all of this. I'm not clean, Carlo. I've been filing your illegal contracts for 3 years. You're innocent. He cut me off. In ways that matter. You didn't choose this life. You didn't want power or money or the kind of influence that comes from knowing where the bodies are buried. You just wanted to be invisible and safe, and I ruined that because I was selfish enough to want you anyway. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in my chest. I'm terrified, he continued, his forehead dropping to rest against mine, that one day you'll realize you can do better than a man who solves problems with violence. That you'll walk away, and I'll have to let you go because keeping you prisoner would destroy the very thing I love about you. And what's that? I whispered. Your choice. The fact that you could leave and you haven't. Yet? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his confession settle over us both. You're impossible. I know. Possessive to the point of obsession. Yes. Threatening lawyers for being polite. I'll do worse to anyone who tries to take you from me. I should have been terrified. Should have run. But his hands were cradling my face like I was something precious, and I was so tired of pretending I didn't feel the pull between us. I'm not going anywhere, I heard myself say. But Carlo, you have to trust me. You have to let me exist in the world without threatening every man who looks at me. His laugh was hollow. I can't promise that. Then we're going to have a problem. We already have a problem, Susan. And his name is Dante Moretti. Vincent was late. It was 6:15, and the black Mercedes hadn't appeared in its usual spot outside the Longo Holdings building. I stood in the lobby, watching the street through bulletproof glass, my phone showing 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. Anthony, my building guard who'd accompanied me to work that morning, shifted beside me. I'll call the boss. Give Vincent 5 more minutes. Maybe traffic, Miss Pollard. Vincent is never late. His hand moved his jacket, and I knew he was reaching for his phone. Or his gun. Possibly both. He made it 2 steps before the lobby doors opened. 3 men walked in. Expensive suits. Confident strides. The kind of men who looked like they belonged in a building full of corporate offices and conference rooms. But I'd spent 3 years learning to read the signs, the bulge under the left shoulder, the way they moved in formation, the cold assessment in their eyes as they scanned the lobby and locked onto me. Susan Pollard? The one in front smiled. Handsome, mid-40s, with the kind of charm that probably worked on people who didn't know better. We need you to come with us. Anthony stepped between us, his hand now visibly on his weapon. She's not going anywhere. That's unfortunate. The man's smile didn't waver. Because Mr. Moretti would very much like to have a conversation with Ms. Pollard. And Mr. Moretti doesn't like to be kept waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. Moretti, the rival Don who'd been having me followed. The man Carlo had warned me about with fear in his eyes. "Tell Mr. Moretti that Ms. Pollard is unavailable," Anthony said, his voice steady even as his hand tightened on his gun. Here's the thing, the man's hand moved with practiced speed, producing a weapon I hadn't seen coming. "We're not really asking." Everything happened at once. Anthony drew his gun. The other two men rushed forward. The lobby security guard behind the desk reached for his phone, and I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Not toward the exit. That was blocked. Not toward the elevators. Too slow. I ran toward the emergency stairwell, my heels clicking against marble as adrenaline turned my veins to ice. I made it through the door before hands grabbed my arm, yanking me backward with enough force to make me stumble. The man who'd smiled caught me, his grip bruising as he hauled me against his chest. "Don't make this difficult," he said into my ear. "We just want to talk." "Let her go." Anthony's voice came from the lobby entrance, his gun trained on the man holding me. "Can't do that. Boss's orders." The man's gun pressed against my ribs, cold even through my blouse. "But here's what we can do. You put your weapon down, we take the girl for a nice conversation with Mr. Moretti, and nobody has to bleed in this expensive lobby. Carlo will kill you." The words came out before I could stop them. "All of you. He'll hunt you down, and Carlo Longo is a businessman playing at being a crime boss," the man interrupted. "He's gotten soft. Comfortable. That's why Mr. Moretti is going to take what should have been his years ago." His grip tightened. "Starting with you." The lobby doors exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. Carlo came through them like a force of nature, flanked by Leo Castellano and 4 other men I recognized from the warehouse operations. But this wasn't the Carlo who sat behind a mahogany desk in a tailored suit. This was someone else entirely. His jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled up, exposing the tattoos I'd only glimpsed once before, Italian script and symbols that marked him as something more than a businessman. His eyes were cold, empty of everything except lethal intent. This was the Carlo that enemies whispered about. The Don who'd consolidated power by being smarter and more brutal than anyone who'd challenged him. This was the man I'd been carefully protected from seeing for 3 years. "Let her go." Each word fell like a death sentence. The man holding me tightened his grip, the gun digging harder into my ribs. "Carlo, good to see you." We were just— Carlo's gun was out and firing before the man finished his sentence. The bullet took him in the shoulder, precise, controlled, designed to incapacitate without killing. Yet, the man's grip on me loosened and I stumbled forward, but Leo was already there, catching me and pulling me behind the line of Carlo's men. "You came into my building," Carlo said, his voice conversational as he stalked toward the wounded man on the floor. "You put your hands on what belongs to me. You pointed a gun at her." He crouched down, pressing his weapon against the man's forehead. "Give me one reason I shouldn't repaint this lobby with your brain." "Moretti won't. Moretti isn't here." "I am." Carlo's finger tightened on the trigger. "And I want you to take a message back to him. Can you do that? Or should I send it with your corpse?" "I'll tell him." The man's voice shook now, all charm gone. "Tell him that Susan Pollard is off limits. Tell him that touching her, looking at her, thinking about her is a death sentence. Tell him that I will burn his entire operation to the ground and salt the earth where it stood before I let him use her as leverage." Carlo stood, and I saw him for what he truly was, not a businessman, not even a boss, but something far more dangerous. "And tell him that the next man he sends won't make it out of the building alive." He turned to Leo without waiting for a response. "Clean this up. Make sure Moretti gets the message. And find Vincent." "Boss." Leo nodded. Then Carlo was in front of me, his hands on my face, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to speak. "Did they touch you beyond restraining you?" Another head shake. His jaw clenched, and I saw the violence he was holding back. "I'm going to kill them anyway." "Carlo, no." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, gentle despite everything. "You don't get to tell me not to protect what's mine. Not after this. Not ever." Behind us, Leo's men were hauling Moretti's people toward the exit. The wounded man left a trail of blood across the pristine marble floor. Anthony was on his phone, likely calling for cleanup. And I stood there in Carlo Longo's arms, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd gotten myself into. He wasn't just possessive, wasn't just obsessed. He was willing to go to war for me. And God help me, I wasn't sure if that terrified me or made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my life. "Take me home," I whispered. His smile was dark and certain. "You're home, Susan. Right here. With me." How much violence can love justify? Comment below or subscribe for the final part of the story. I didn't go to the office for 3 days after the incident in the lobby. Carlo kept me in the penthouse apartment with round-the-clock security while he handled what he called the Moretti situation. I didn't ask for details. The news reported a warehouse fire on the east side, several arrests at a gambling operation, and rumors of a territorial dispute that had been resolved through negotiation. I knew better than to believe this sanitized version. Vincent appeared on the 3rd day with an apology and a scar across his temple that he refused to explain. "They took me off the road before I could get to you," was all he said. "It won't happen again." On Monday morning, he drove me back to Longo Holdings in a new Mercedes with reinforced panels and bulletproof glass. Anthony sat in the passenger seat. 2 additional cars followed us, one in front, one behind. I'd stopped being invisible. Now I traveled like what I was, Carlo Longo's most valuable possession. The lobby had been cleaned. New marble where the blood had stained the old. Fresh paint. No evidence that 3 men had walked in and tried to kidnap me less than a week ago. But the security guard behind the desk was new, and he wore his weapon openly now. No more pretending this was just another corporate building. I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, expecting to return to my desk outside Carlo's office and resume the professional facade we'd maintained for 3 years. Instead, when the doors opened, I found Leo Castellano waiting. "Miss Pollard." He nodded with something that might have been respect. "This way. My desk is being moved." He gestured down the hall, not toward Carlo's office, but toward the executive conference room at the end. The one with the mahogany table that sat 12 and overlooked the entire city. The door was open. Inside, Carlo stood by the window, phone to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. But it was the room itself that made me stop breathing. My desk, the simple wooden one that had been stationed outside his office, was gone. In its place, positioned perpendicular to Carlo's massive desk so they formed an L shape, was something new. Sleek, modern, with built-in filing systems and enough surface space for a computer, documents, and the kind of work that required making decisions rather than just executing them. Carlo ended his call and turned to face me. "What do you think?" "I think you moved my desk into your office." "Our office," he corrected. "You're not sitting outside anymore, Susan. You're sitting here. With me." I walked slowly into the room, running my hand along the edge of the new desk. It was positioned so I could see everyone who entered, could participate in every meeting, every negotiation. This wasn't a secretary's desk. This was the desk of someone with power. "Carlo, I can't, you can. You've been doing it for 3 years without the title. Now you get the acknowledgement." He moved toward me, and I saw he'd changed since the lobby incident. Something had shifted in him, some final wall coming down. "Moretti made a move because he thought you were a weakness. He thought taking you would bring me to my knees. He was right about that, but wrong about what it would make me do." "What did you do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "I made it clear that touching you is the same as declaring war on me. And I don't lose wars, Susan." His hand found mine, threading our fingers together. "But I also realized something. Keeping you invisible didn't protect you. It just made you look vulnerable. Like something to be taken rather than someone to be respected. So you're giving me a desk? I'm giving you a position. My second. My partner. The woman who sits beside me when I make decisions that affect this entire organization." He pulled me closer, and I let him. "The woman everyone in this building will answer to when I'm not here. The woman who will have protection, resources, and authority that makes her untouchable." I thought about the girl who'd walked into this building 3 years ago, desperate to disappear, convinced that invisibility was the only form of safety. I don't know how to be that person. You already are that person. You've been managing my schedule, my contracts, my business operations for 3 years. The only difference is now you'll do it openly. His other hand came up to cut my face. And you'll do it wearing whatever you want. Sitting where you belong. Making decisions that matter. What if I make the wrong decision? Then we fix it. Together. He smiled, and it was softer than I'd ever seen. You think I've made it this far without making mistakes? The difference is I had no one I trusted to tell me when I was wrong. Now I do. The weight of that trust settled over me like a crown, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to refuse. The board won't accept me, I said, grasping for practical objections. The board works for me. They'll accept what I tell them to accept. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. Say yes, Susan. Stop running from this. From us. From the life you could have if you stopped trying to be invisible. I looked past him at the desk that represented everything I'd convinced myself I didn't want. Power. Visibility. A seat at the table where decisions were made and lives were changed. It terrified me. But staying hidden, staying small, had nearly gotten me killed. Maybe it was time to stop disappearing. Yes, I whispered. Carlo's kiss was possessive and claiming and felt like coming home to a place I'd been denying existed. When he pulled back, his eyes held something I'd never seen before, peace. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a small box, not velvet, but the same black lacquer as the one that had held the lingerie. Inside was a key, simple, silver, unremarkable except for what it represented. Key to the office? I asked. Key to everything. My apartment. My safe. My files. Every door in this building. He pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it. No more locked doors between us. No more secrets. You're in this now, completely. And Susan, once you're in, there's no going back. I should have been afraid. Should have mourned the loss of my invisible life. But I looked at the desk that was now mine, at the man who'd torn down every wall to claim me, at the key that represented trust I'd never asked for but desperately wanted. Good, I said. Because I'm done running. His smile was dangerous and beautiful and entirely mine. I sat at my new desk that afternoon, taking notes during a meeting with Marcus Vitelli about dock operations while Carlo negotiated territory disputes with Franco Romano. But this time, when Carlo asked for my input, I gave it. When Marcus questioned a contract clause, I was the one who answered. And when the meeting ended, I didn't retreat to invisibility. I stayed exactly where I belonged. 3 years ago, I'd learned to disappear to survive Carlo Longo's world. Now I was learning to be seen. To be powerful. To be the woman sitting in the seat beside the city's most dangerous man, not as his secretary, but as his equal. The crimson silk still hung in my closet, a reminder of the accident that had changed everything. But I didn't need Marco's gift anymore. Carlo had replaced it with something better, his trust, his protection, and a place at his side that no one could take from me. I'd stopped being the invisible girl. And I'd become someone infinitely more dangerous, the woman Carlo Longo would burn the city down to protect. Thank you for listening until the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the story. There's another story like the one you just enjoyed on your left screen.